Welcome everyone to our first legal webinar of the year. My name is Sandra Vidrio, and it is a pleasure to connect with each one of you, having you join us on the Zoom meeting for today. And of course, if you're checking out the recording, welcome to our third Friday legal webinar. The topic for this month is going to be reviewing a legal checklist for new entrepreneurs and business owners that have been operating for years. So the content that you will learn today will apply whether you're in the startup phase or if you are in a business that has been operating for less than a year. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with our welcome remarks. I do want to take this moment to share to those, if it's your first time joining the Zoom meeting, please utilize the Zoom tools that appear, whether you're on your computer or your tablet or your phone. So in order to interact during the presentation, please submit your questions and answers by using the chat box icon. And if you are joining, se están conectando en español, por favor seleccionen el icono donde aparece un globo como un mundo, dice interpretación. Seleccionen para poder escuchar la presentación de hoy en español. And if you're using a mobile device, you must select the more options to get the full Zoom meeting controls. And if you have any questions, you can always raise your hand or mention your question by unmuting yourself on that icon. This is our agenda for today. So my name is Sandra Vidrio, Business Development Officer at the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. I'll be doing some quick remarks, and then I'll also have one of my team members, David or Alicia Aguirre, join us to share a little bit about an event that we have coming up. And of course, we'll switch it over to Bill Cal to do the presentation for today. And we'll end it with some questions and answers. So we'll have this call, wrap it up by 2 p.m. today. And of course, the recording is currently being recorded. That way you can review the content at your own time after today's presentation. As I had mentioned, the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation, if it's your first time joining the call, we are an organization here to help and support startup businesses, existing businesses, getting you on that long-term journey for you as a business owner. And these are our 3 core programs that we have in addition to other programming that will be announced throughout the year. So our technical assistance, where we provide one-on-one business consulting, where we review your business plan, your business goals, your financial goals. It's a very unique way for us to connect with each one of you on an individual basis, whether it's in person or online. We do offer virtual consultations as well. And we also have our team member, one of our team members was the director of export-import, David, who could be able to provide further assistance if you're looking to tap into that business market. We also provide weekly webinars and ongoing trainings for individuals that want to continue building their capacity in different areas, whether it's legal, finance, marketing, business planning. We do our best to coordinate weekly webinars for you with industry experts to share some information with you that you can apply on your day-to-day business operation. And we also have specific cohort-based learning programs like our Successful Womanpreneur, Latinapreneur, where we're able to bring together women throughout the country and even the world to connect and learn about how to create their own marketing strategy and online presence to sell online. So if you're interested in that, leave your email on the chat box, and I would be more than happy to share with you information on our upcoming cohorts in the summertime. And we also, as a CDFI Community Development Financial Institution, our organization provides microloans, not just to small business owners, but also consumer lending. So if you are in search of some financing resources for your business or as an individual, contact our office at 559-222-8705, and we would be more than glad to assist you and connect you with the right team member. So here is all the social media platforms where you can follow us, give us a like, be in the loop to find out of what other programming and content we have available within the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation. And one of those events is where we're giving here opportunity to find out of some other programs and meet other of our team members. So with that, not sure, David, Alicia, if you're in the call, if you want to share about the Negociantes Unidos event.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So David couldn't be here today, unfortunately, couldn't hop in the meeting. So I'm speaking on his behalf. I help him in his import-export project, the one that Sandra was just speaking on. And we want to invite you guys to our next networking event, which is on Wednesday, the 26th from 7:30 to 9. We will have Mayor Jerry Dyer as our keynote speaker, and I really encourage you guys to take advantage of these events that we put together for you guys. If you guys want to attend, you do need to RSVP, and you can do that through our website. And I don't know if we have a slide for this, but all those like resources that Sandra was just listing, to fully take advantage of them, we do encourage you guys to become members, which is something you can totally find on our website. You can give us a call, visit our office. Either way, we're here to help you guys, like Sandra said, become that strong business here in Fresno.
Thank you, Alicia. And we'll make sure to share the information on the chat box for the in-person event. And of course, we'll be following all COVID-19 protocols. And we are now at the time for Bill to join us, him and his team at New Business Community Law Clinic for today's presentation. So with that, that concludes our opening remarks on behalf of the foundation. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So you're going to give me co-host capacity here so we can get things going here.
Yeah, you should be able to.
You're all set now? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be going through, as Sandra said, a very important sort of overview of the legal issues that new businesses usually have to deal with. Maybe even some older businesses need to also do this little checklist to make sure you got all your legal bases covered there. So I did want to introduce 3 students who'll be working with me today, presenting different parts of the PowerPoint. So we got Anusha Shah. Yeah, please, wave when you hear your name. Anusha Shah, Kavya Dasari, and Adriana Alvarado. And with that, we will get started. Let's get our screen up here. Optimize for this, share the sound, here we go, good. And let me just get the PowerPoint up on the desk here. One other thing I'll say while I'm setting this up is that we are going to go through the PowerPoint basically from start to finish, and then have you ask questions. And what you could do is put the questions in the chat if you would, because then we can, when we finish and we go to Q&A, we'll take the questions in order there. And of course, we'll have information at the last slide that describes how to get in touch with us for future consultations, materials that you might need. We do have regular office hours Monday and Wednesdays from 11 to 2 p.m. that you can sign up through our website, through Eventbrite. And that's where you can have a 45-minute individual consultation with an attorney and a law student working together to provide you legal help if you can't afford an attorney. All right. Okay, well, let's get to the first slide here if we can. There we go. Yes, so the first thing I would just say is that, yeah, we sort of analogize the starting of a business as sort of, getting out on the road and trying to keep safe. There are lots of different hazards and things, and it's something that, there are legal aspects of getting out on that road that we want to acquaint you with. But I do want to say at the beginning, of course, this doesn't actually constitute legal advice. That's what you would get in that individual session with us if you sign up for one of those 45-minute confidential consultations. And then we would be giving you advice, but this is general legal information, okay? All right, well, one of the first things I would think about is, go back. I was going to try and give you a sense of things. First of all, many people have said to me, gee, this is, it's so easy to start a business, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of like flying a kite, really. I mean, it's, you put it up in the air, and if it hits a tree, well, you just take it down and you just fix it up and you put it right back up again. No big deal, right? Well, it doesn't really feel, trust us, for the 300 businesses we talk to each year, it doesn't really feel like that when you're starting a business. It actually feels a little more like this.
Okay, merge. Merge.
This navigation system's all messed up. It thinks we're in a park. Oh my God, it is a park! Away from the kids! Hey, for the lake!
Yes, yes. It feels a little bit more like learning how to drive because of the so many things you have to think about, risks that are out there. What we're trying to do here is to think about getting you on the road, keeping you safe and knowledgeable about business issues and legal issues in those business issues that you need to pay attention to. And we've actually created a little acronym for you to think about to do your self check on this thing. It's called BECOME. And the idea is we want you to become a survivor. And that would mean one of the 50% of businesses that survive after 5 years. And that percentage is actually lower since the pandemic. But, many of the businesses that don't survive have a gap in know-how. Sometimes it's a gap in capital, but many times it's a gap in just understanding what are the requirements that are expected of all entrepreneurs, of business entities, things like that. And, it's very hard to find an attorney at this early stage who can help you, for less than $350 an hour. Why would you pay an attorney when you can't even pay yourself? So that's why we're here, is to try and make sure that you get that information going forward. And so these are 6 aspects of operating a business to pay attention to. Business modeling, we're going to start with, entity formation, capitalization, getting capital into your business, operational relationships. So these are things like employees or contractors or suppliers or such. Managing the risks of your business, and then extra permits and licenses that you may need to operate your business. Okay, so we're going to start with Anusha telling us about business modeling.
Hi, everybody. So today I'll talk about the first aspect of what's required to run a successful business, which is the B of the BECOME, which stands for business modeling. Now, what exactly is business modeling? Business modeling is kind of like a business plan. For instance, if you were to create a business model for all the national parks in the United States, this is exactly what your business model would look like. Essentially, business model is an internal process that you as a company must get involved in to understand the varied aspects that are required to be figured out to run a successful business. So well-defined business model will help you organize your thinking. It'll help you clarify the very tasks that you as a business want to be involved in. It'll help you spot the very kind of legal issues that may arise while starting a new company, and how it'll essentially help you mitigate these very different legal risks. Additionally, externally, a well-defined business model can help you identify the varied key stakeholders that you may want to work with. For instance, investors like banks or VCs. So it's pretty essential that you have a well-defined business model in place. However, a business model is not just like a map. And in order to better understand what goes inside a business model, we have created a business model canvas, which consists of a set of 9 components that are traditionally linked to running a successful business. So let's look at this business canvas. You'll see on the right side, there are certain elements such as value proposition, customer relationships, customer segments, and channels. These are essentially will help you define the goal of your business. For instance, let's begin with value proposition. What exactly is value proposition? Now, value proposition is certain properties or something that your business has which differentiates it from other businesses in the same competitive market. What is it that you as a business can provide to your customers that will attract your customers towards you as opposed to your competitors? What is it that will give your particular business a competitive edge? Once you have identified the kind of value that your business can bring to your target audience, your second aspect to look at is the customer segment. What are the kind of customers that you're trying to target with your business? Who are the customers that should be attracted towards your business? Once you have identified that, you need to think about the kind of relationship you want to have with these customers. And finally, you need to think about the channels that will help you have these kind of relationships and attract this particular target audience. So that is the right side of the canvas. Now, moving on to the left side of this business model canvas, you will see 3 additional components that will help you achieve or help you push out your product or your business in a successful manner. Starting off with key partners. Now, who are these key partners? Key partners are essentially partners that you will want to work with for an ongoing long period of time and who are essential to help you run a very successful business. Thereafter, you need to identify what are the key activities. What are the activities that you want your business to be involved in? How will you run these activities? And finally, you need to think about the key resources. What are the resources that you must have to ensure that your key activities are met, to ensure that your business achieves the goals that it set out for itself? And finally, we will move into the financial aspect, which in my opinion is the most important aspect of any business, which is the cost structure and the revenue stream. Now, what is cost structure? Before starting any business, any good businessman should have a well-defined cost structure in place, which basically sets out the different activities that you will undertake that will require your investment, that will require some spending on your part. Once you have identified this, you of course need a return on your revenue. So that's when you also set out a revenue stream. What are the varied activities that your business will undertake that will help generate revenue and help make back the money that you've invested? So this is an overview of a basic business model. Of course, at first glance, it sounds super complicated and it can be confusing to a lot of people. So to better understand what a business model exactly looks like, let's look at an example, taking a real life example. I'm sure most of you have heard of Southwest Airlines. Yes. So what does Southwest Airline need to do to ensure that it runs a successful business, to ensure that it mitigates any kind of, legal risks that it may get involved in? Have a business model in place. Now, what does the business model for Southwest Airlines look like? So this is an example that of what a business model should look like. Again, starting from value proposition. What is the value that Southwest Airlines provides to its customers that may be not provided by other competitors in the market? And how does Southwest Airlines get a competitive edge in this competitive market? So one would be no frills. Number two could be cheap flights. Of course, if there are cheap flights, it targets a particular kind of customer base, which is your customer segment, which is travelers who want to travel on a budget. Once it has identified the customer segment and its value proposition, it should think about the kind of relationship it wants with these customers. So for instance, it probably wants to hire and train a staff that is friendly with its customers, because that, as we all know, is very important in the airline industry. It probably wants to have a web portal which is easily accessible by its customers so that its customers can, quickly book these airlines. And once that has been recognized, it has to look at the channels that it can use to achieve all of these above goals. So for instance, have a good website or, different web portals through which customers can quickly book their air tickets, or work with call centers to achieve these goals. Once that has been defined, we will again move on to the left side of the canvas. These are the aspects that it needs to look into to run into and to push a successful business out. Firstly, the key partners. Again, as I mentioned earlier, who are key partners? Key partners are basically those partners with whom you'll have a continuous long-term ongoing relationship. And these partners are very essential to have a successful business relationship. So again, in the airline industry, cheap airports as hubs would be a pertinent partner to have. Hotels with whom you can, partner up. Car rental companies, or even website search engines such as your Expedia or your Kayak, through which your customers will be booking your tickets. Once you've identified your key partners, Southwest needs to identify the main activities that it needs to provide, or it wishes to provide to its customers. For instance, of course, flying and maintaining a fleet of planes. When you're booking flight tickets, it needs to have a payment gateway or process payment. So that's something it really needs to look into. It needs to hire and train staff. So these are the key activities that it must look into, or it should set out that it wishes to acquire. Once it has identified the activities, how will these activities be met? That's when your key resources come into play. What are the resources that are required to ensure that your business produces these activities? Of course, like I mentioned, Southwest would want to have and fly and maintain a fleet of airplanes. So of course, for that, you need large inventory. Then you need to hire and maintain a staff. For that, you need enthusiastic, friendly staff that you need to hire. And additionally, you need to think about advertising and branding. Branding includes things like IP registration, which is, for instance, trade name or your logos. No one else in the industry misuses it or takes advantage of your name and your logo. Finally, coming to the financial aspect of the business model, structure. Now, what will this cost structure involve? As I mentioned earlier, your cost structure, you should have a good basic idea of where your investment will be going. Where will you be spending your money? Money will you be spending on these different elements? So in case of Southwest Airlines, it will spend majority of its investment on the purchase of planes and the maintenance of planes. Then, of course, labor costs, training and hiring of staff, insurance, marketing and advertising. These are big expenses that it needs to take into consideration. Finally, since it'll be spending so much money, of course, it needs to make a return on its investment. So what are the revenue streams? Airline tickets are bought, or it could be things like expenses in flight, like, for example, Wi-Fi, charging for Wi-Fi, charging for extra baggage. These are varied streams through which the airline industry or Southwest Airlines can return and get back some money. So this is what a basic business model should look like. And every single element should be thought about in great detail before you decide to run and start off your business. You will slowly start identifying the varied legalities that are involved. For example, in case of Southwest, if Southwest has identified its key partner as, hotels or web search engines that will help run its business. Southwest, it'll think about the very legalities involved. For instance, you need certain contracts in place with these partners. Or if it thinks about branding. Now, when you think about branding, you need trademark registration, or if it's some other industry, like if you're in a creative field, you need copyright registration. If you're working on an invention, you need patent registration. So these are the varied aspects and the very legalities you start thinking about once you have this well-defined model in front of you. So this is why we think it's very pertinent to have a business model in place, so that not only do you understand the very legalities that are involved, but you also understand the legal risks involved, and it'll help you mitigate as much as possible most of these legal risks, and help you run a successful business. Which is why I think the B, which is business modeling, and the first pertinent. Now the E of the become, and I'll hand it over to Kavya to dive right into it.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Kavya,
I forgot to unmute myself.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Anuja. So to discuss entity formation, after you've identified a strong business model in your business model canvas, you want to look at these risks and you want to think about the kind of entity you want to form. So if you think about your business like a journey, then an entity is essentially the type of car you want to travel in. So just like there are many different kinds of cars, you also have a lot of different entity options, and you want to choose the options that you generally have available. So you have sole proprietorships, you have partnerships, you have corporations, you have limited liability companies, and there are several different kinds of partnerships and several different kinds of corporations. But before we go into depth about these different options, there's a really important point to keep in mind. That is, if you don't form, we'll assign one for you. So if you're single or a married couple working on a business together, the law will treat you like you're a sole proprietor. If two or more people are in business together, the law will treat you as a partnership. And so what is the problem with this? So I get an entity for free, that's good, right? Well, neither of these two entities, sole proprietorships or partnerships, have limited liability protection. Limited liability is a very important concept. If you don't have limited liability, that means you have personal liability. And personal liability means that if something goes wrong in your business or someone gets hurt because of one of your products, then you're on the hook, and that person can come after your personal assets like your house or your car. But if you have limited liability, you create a separation between you and your business. And so if something goes wrong, that person can only sue the entity and go after the entity's bank account. They can't come after your personal assets. So limited liability can be a very important thing that you want to keep in mind ahead of time. And you also have an opportunity to make a choice. So you should form an entity that fits your needs instead of letting the law decide one for you. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about how to choose an entity. With choosing an entity, there are some important questions you want to think about, and there are some not so important questions to think about. First, it's not important to think about which entity is easiest to form, or which has the lowest filing fees, or which has the least amount of paperwork. At this time and age, a lot of filing has become electronic, and it's relatively easy to form any type of entity. So you can form most type of entities for under $100. Instead, you want to focus on your business needs when choosing an entity. You want to think about your business model canvas and think about your risks and think about these important questions. For example, an important question would be on governance. How do you want decisions to be made in your business? Do you want it to be shared decision making, or do you prefer a formal structure like a board in a corporation? You also want to think about taxes. How do you want your business income to be taxed? Basically, there are two main types of tax arrangements. First, you have an entity level tax arrangement. Here we're talking about entities like corporations. For example, a corporation pays taxes every year. But then when it distributes profits to shareholders, these are dividends, the shareholders also have to pay taxes on those profits going forward. This is what is called double taxation. Second type of tax arrangement you can have is pass-through taxation. Here we're talking about entities like sole proprietorships or partnerships or S corporations. The business reports its income to the government, but then that income passes through to the owners, who then file their own 1040 filings and pay taxes on their income. The entity itself does not pay taxes in a pass-through system. In addition to tax, you also want to think about liability. We talked about limited liability. Do you want your company to have a limited liability shield? We know how important limited liability can be, but there's also a cost to limited liability. For example, if you're doing business in California, you'd need to pay an $800 franchise tax every year to have this limited liability protection. But this is the cost of separating yourself from your business. And sometimes that can be very important. Fortunately, there is a first-year tax holiday if you're an LLC or a corporation in California, so you wouldn't need to pay the franchise tax in the first year. So if you're thinking about forming your entity, I suggest maybe making it in January as opposed to December or something. You want to take advantage of that first-year holiday. Lastly, you also want to think about capitalization. If you're trying to raise funds for your business, people can't just contribute if your entity is a sole proprietorship. Instead, you need an entity that can catch the capital. We want you to think about where you might be getting this capital from. Will you be going to venture capital companies? These are those big firms that put money with the expectation of getting a very large return. And there are specific types of entities that these companies are interested in. And if venture capital is not something that you're thinking about right now, any other type of entity with limited liability protection is usually a very good choice. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go over some highlights of different entity options. Our team will be providing you with these slides, so you can take your time reviewing them, reviewing through the differences when you're considering on your entity choice. Here, as you can see, we formatted our presentation by focusing on the 4 important areas we talked about before: governance, tax, liability, and capitalization. So big picture, the most common entities are corporations, limited liability companies, sole proprietorships, and partnerships. Corporations. These can be either for-profit corporations or not-for-profit corporations. They generally have formal board structures for making decisions. They have entity-level taxation that we talked about, that double tax regime. And then there's also the $800 California franchise tax in order to get that limited liability shield if the company's doing business in California. Nonprofit corporations can get tax exemptions. So you have that options that you want to be on the lookout for to be able to file and apply and get those tax exemptions. And corporations can also be very flexible vehicles for structuring funding. Next, we have limited liability companies. With limited liability companies, decision-making can depend on how it's structured. It could be member managed or manager managed. So there are multiple options. It depends on the contract. So depending on your needs, we can structure the contract in a way that fits what you're looking for. This entity also has pass-through taxation with the limited liability option. Again, you have the $800 franchise fee you want to think about. Next, we have sole proprietorships and partnerships, where the owner or partners respectively are the ones making the decisions. These are both pass-through entities, but again, remember, these entities have personal liability. So you want to get a lot of insurance to manage your risks. But if that insurance runs out, then you are on the hook. So something to think about when you're deciding on your entity choice. And structuring funding for these entities could be less flexible than a corporation. Next slide, please. You also have some less common entities, such as benefit corporations, S corporations, and cooperatives. So benefit corporations, also known as social purpose corporations, is essentially a corporation, but it has a social mission added into it when the entity is formed. So this means that if the board is making a decision on how the company should be run, on which projects to choose, it doesn't have to pick the project that makes the most amount of money. It can choose the projects that promote the company's social mission. So if the focus for benefit corporations is that social mission aspect and that social mission focus. For S corporations, they're also another type of corporation, except they get passed through taxation. So you're avoiding the double taxation part of a usual corporation. However, there are a few restrictions when you're forming an S corporation. For example, it can't have more than 100 shareholders. The shareholders also have to be human, and they have to have legal status. So this means if a business is investing in the corporation, that won't work when it comes to an S Corp, and it differs back to being a C corporation. So another thing to consider. And finally, we have cooperatives, which can be structured either as a limited liability company or a corporation, except the unique thing about cooperatives is that the employees are basically the owners as well. They're the ones that are making the decisions in a cooperative. And all of the profits in the cooperative pass through to the owner. So again, no double taxation, you have pass-through structure of taxation happening here. Next slide, please. And lastly, with entity formation, you also want to think about where to form the entity. For example, if you know you will be going for venture capital financing, then you might want to form your entity in Delaware, because venture capitalists love Delaware. Delaware has specialized business courts, and venture capital companies are very familiar with the law in Delaware, so they want to stay there as much as possible. Importantly, even if you formed your entity somewhere else, if you'll still be doing business in California, then you still have to pay the $800 franchise tax in order to get that limited liability protection. At the moment, if you're not considering venture capital funding anytime soon, then it might be a good idea to incorporate in California, because you generally want to form where you are. And if you decide to go to venture capital financing later on, you can always reincorporate somewhere else. So it's not set in stone. With that, I will pass it to the next presenter who will be talking about capitalization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kavya. So I'm going to talk a little bit about capitalization. So Kavya for putting that business model forward. Now I'm going to talk about how to get that gas into your tank in terms of bringing in capital. And so just a couple of things about capital. You can get it from a lot of different sources. You know, the founders usually put in some money. Maybe you get some family and friends to contribute. You can get loans from banks or private creditors, equity investors. This would be like the venture capitalists, or maybe angels who are rich individuals who, you know, just care about the service or the product that you're providing exciting. Grant agencies and government, I wouldn't say that those tend to give to for-profit businesses, but sometimes, I mean, during the pandemic, the state of California did make some grants available to help people through. So, but normally they give to more like nonprofit businesses. So, and then the next thing you need to do is think about, well, you know, that part of the costs and the activities that we talked about in the business model canvas. Why do you need this capital there? Well, you know, you might need to just get started, prototypes. Maybe you're creating a prototype that then you'll be using in your business, but it's going to take a little while for an engineer to design it or something. And of course, you have to pay for that. Ongoing expenses and capital improvements. Again, many of these, once you're getting going, are going to be taken care of by revenue, but you may need a little boost at the beginning to basically put your business in order to get it, you know, on the road. And then there's this balance that you have to think about here going forward. It's always a balance between, you know, the founders and their family and their friends, what they can bring into the business at the beginning, debt, taking on outside debt. And then there's also equity, meaning selling a piece of your company, the ownership of the company, and possibly the profit coming out of that company to people in exchange for funding as well. Now, here's some of the rules you have to think about with this. Of course, from your family and friends, well, you don't need to pay it back if you fail, if you have good family relationships. Anyway, they might forgive that if you failed and they gave you some money, like my brother-in-law did with pets.com. Anyway, but you can't bankrupt yourself or your family. You're probably gonna be not sufficient. You're gonna need some capital from some other sources. So what about debt? Yes, a bank, private creditor. You could set up a promissory note with them. The thing is, you don't have to give up any control. I mean, like an angel or a bank, and a bank or a private creditor usually doesn't want to be on your board of directors or anything. But if you do close down, you still have to pay it back is the problem, okay? Whereas in contrast, equity, if you're selling a piece of the company, a profit share or ownership of the company, you don't need to pay it back if you person getting the equity stake in your business may want to have some control, might want to be on the board or have some special perks that then allow them to take control if certain milestones aren't met. So, it's kind of a trade-off of all of these different things. And there's several different legal instruments to set up, loans or equity or these hybrid things, by the way, you should know, they're called convertible debt. Or convertible equity. This just means somebody might give you a loan and then, at a certain time, maybe the next financing round where people, you get several investors coming in, then that piece of money that they gave you at the beginning gives them a sort of a foot in the door, a little special, edge on, maybe a lower price that they can buy shares at that first financing round. Okay, that's what's called convertible debt or convertible equity. And talk with us about it if you have some questions on how to set that up. But here, let's go into the sort of a sense of where you are over time with something like this. So many of you, and I would say many new businesses as well, are on the left side here in the blue or the green area. Okay, so founders are putting in their own money. They may get a little bit of equity funds. Maybe they give their friends some stock or some family members some stock, or maybe this angel that might come along who is a high net worth individual, but is mostly caring about your business, not a big upside in terms of profits and stuff. And so again, they might fund you with a loan, or they might fund you with one of these convertible loan instruments we were talking about. You may actually take on some real debt, just a loan. It might be secured with a piece of property or unsecured. And then, people in this timeline here are sort of forming any of these kinds of entities, an LLC, a partnership, or a corporation. But then if you're starting to think about going for venture capital, again, these big firms that will give you money to get like a 10 times return on their investment within a year only want to invest in private corporations. I mean, you might ask why. Well, it's because a private corporation can always be controlled with a 51% share of the ownership. Okay, whereas like an LLC or a partnership, everyone has to agree in the LLC or the partnership about new investment coming in. So that means like the venture capitalist might, court an LLC and then have one person turn them down, and they don't want to mess with that. So instead, they want to have a private corporation where the rules are clear, where they can take over the corporation with a 51%. And then, you might grow in second round of venture capital and grow into a public corporation down the way. But that's why, most of the big companies that you're seeing that are national in scope are getting a lot of investment capital are corporations. All right, well, now we're going to on 3 sort of types of financing for you to be thinking about, okay? Now, the first 2 have to deal with securities, okay? What is a security? A security is an interest, it's like an investment contract. So yeah, if you went on to one of the stock buying portals or something like that and bought some stock in, I don't know, Apple or something like that, that is a promise. It is an investment promise that if you put in some money, you will, according to, the company does well, you get some profits there. You might be able to sell the thing to somebody else at a gain. You bought it at this price and now it's going up in value. You sell it later, you get, gain there, capital gain. But one thing you should know about these stocks is that they are very highly regulated by the state and by the federal government as well. And this is because, just so you know, this is one of the reasons that the Great Depression happened back in the early 1930s. It's because there were so many shysters out there just selling shares to companies that didn't exist. They used to call it the blue sky laws. And why is that? Because people were selling you pieces of the blue sky. And, of course, not able to sell you pieces of the blue sky, but still taking in money for it. So they're highly regulated. And so one of the main things you do is when you try and sell a piece of your business, this is what I call traditional securities, okay? There's only a few exceptions to you being able to sell a piece of your company. There are 2 basic groups that you can sell to. One is insiders, so that would be the founders and their family, their friends maybe. And then there's rich people, or what we call accredited investors. These would be people with more than $1 million in net worth, or more than $200,000 of income, or $300,000 if they're a couple. But why are those 2 the only people you can sell to? Okay, well, it's all based on this potential misleading that the SEC and the state is concerned about. Insiders will probably know if something is fraudulent. The founders or their friends or family, they to find out, what is the real financial picture of the company. And so the government tends to think that they can protect themselves, just like accredited investors, because the general thinking of them is, look, they don't tend to invest their money unless they've had some advisors, or there's just more room for error with them. And so we're going to allow you to sell shares to, again, either rich people or insiders. Generally, there's no advertising. Like, you can't go to your church and just say, whoa, I got a new company, come and buy my shares. Actually, that breaks securities laws. So don't do that. So that's what it used to be. That used to be the only way you could sell securities. But now there's this thing called crowdfunding. It's one of the few things that Obama was able to get through with the help of the Republicans. So it's the thing called the Federal Jobs Act. What it allowed people to do is to go on different funding portal sites like Indiegogo and GoFundMe and stuff like that. Different investment opportunities, a new company that's starting up and doing this, or another company that's doing this, and they can look and they can go, whoa, okay, let's see, what do we see here? Oh, I see their financials, so they have to disclose their financials. They have to have a business plan. So you can search these things on that website and decide to invest. Well, but you can't invest a lot, this is the thing with crowdfunding, what they say is that, okay, we will let middle income people invest, but only a percentage of their income, depending on whether they're making over 100,000 or less than 100,000, there's percents of your income that you can invest every year. And the portals check that income for you. So you don't have to, if you list something on a crowdfunding site, you don't have to be checking the income of your investors. The crowdfunding site will do that for you. And by the way, usually people, if they do this, what they are purchasing is a convertible note, a convertible loan. So what that happens is, let's say I put in dollars and my company then went on to a first financing round where there's lots of investors coming in. That just means that I have $5,000 worth of the company, whatever it's worth, when that first funding round comes around. And of course, maybe people are putting in millions of dollars, so your 5,000 doesn't mean a whole lot, but it does mean you get some shares of the company. And if it takes off, maybe you can sell those shares at a profit. So now there is this other thing that isn't quite equity, isn't quite selling securities. It's called Kickstarter. And you probably have heard about this. The basic idea is, here we go. I'm starting a pie company and my pies are always going to be sold for, I don't know, $25. Okay, well, I could go on Kickstarter and say, I got you give me $10 and, or better yet, okay, you give me $100 and I'll give you 10 pies. Okay, whenever you want them, I give you 10 pies, you gave me $100. So what that means is it's like a pre-sale. So then you got that $100 from them and it helps, then pay for, getting the kitchen together and your supplies and stuff. And then you produce the pies and then they get it at a discount because they came in early and then helped you develop your business, you see. And of course, you still have to follow those contractual obligations to follow through if somebody gives you money for it. Okay. All right, so those are the basic ways that you can raise capital and put gas into your tank. I'm now going to go into, all right, who else is in this car with you going forward down the road? Hopefully not so many people like this, but who are the people like employees, the workers? Let's talk about that. The most common relationships to be thinking about are capital providers. We already talked about investors and creditors. Okay, but workers, okay, who's going to be offering the products, the services, providing service? Yeah, workers are very important relationships to set up carefully. There's a lot of liability if you were set up the relationships incorrectly, which we'll go to in a minute. Suppliers, yeah, you're a restaurant, you need tomatoes to make your pasta sauce. Okay, well, you're probably going to have a contract with them on a regular basis to provide those supplies. And then consumers, let's say you're an e-commerce business, you're selling stuff over the web. Yeah, there you will be potentially creating contracts with your consumers as well. Now, the main thing you just know about these is that there are some government requirements for each of these relationships that we're going to try and acquaint you with. We'll just focus on workers this one time for the limited time we have. But there may be other things that are required besides what the government requires. So, for example, you are setting up with probably minimal or at least optimal to do it, because then your employees will know what the policies are and when they can take a leave and stuff like that. So just know that each of these relationships have to be carefully set up. All right. And the only one we're going to cover today is workers, because it's the place where most people get into trouble as a new business. All right. So let's cover this real quick. Okay. Employees. The presumption is that all workers are employees. Okay, the state of California is very protective of employees, so it doesn't want people to be paid, off of minimum wage or with no overtime, unless they really qualify as being an independent contractor, and we'll get into that in a second. So, with the presumption that all workers are employees, that means that employers have this very, we gave you a link here that has the list of all the requirements, but yeah, it's a lot of stuff. And if any of you have been employees before, some of this, the employer has to withhold taxes, they have to register with the Employment Development Department, they have to provide workers' comp and disability policies, a number of different things that they have to do. And any one of those could be, potential liability if you aren't paying attention to it there. Now, California is what's called an at-will state. What that means is that, was a little bit of a fiction, but the employee and the employer have the same power to walk away from the relationship at any point for any lawful reason. Like if I was employing you and I didn't like the way you treated a customer, I could just say, you're gone, like now. Okay. And similarly, employee says, gee, you don't, you can't talk to me that way, I'm gone. Okay. So they can leave anytime. Well, the thing is, if you use a contract to hire someone, then you can only dismiss them according to the contract or for good cause. Okay. And of course, you can never dismiss somebody for, because you don't like their religion or something like that. Okay, so that's why to maintain this at-will situation where you can walk away from the relationship as an employer or the employee can, then you don't give them an employee contract, you give them what's called an offer letter, which only states what the terms of the employment is, and the worker signs it as though they've received it, they know what the terms are, but that doesn't create, under California law, a contract. So it maintains the at-will situation. Now, what we say is that all those 17 things that you have to pay attention to, oh gosh, if you're not an accountant and you love this sort of thing, definitely use a payroll service to manage these requirements, because they'll take care of all of it for you and it is a deductible expense. So definitely recommend that. Independent contractors, tough situation right now because the state of California is very touchy about this, because Uber and Lyft have overreached in this area and called employees, workers, contractors, when in many respects, California state laws define them as employees. So here's the test when you're trying to think about whether you can hire a contractor for a job or not. The three-part test. First is you can't control that contractor very much. A classic situation would be a plumber. Okay, you have a business, your drain gets stopped up. Okay, well, you call the plumber and say, come on in, I have a stuffed up drain. You aren't going to be standing over them while they do it. You aren't going to be giving them tools and say, use these tools. You're saying, unstop my drain. And then they bring in, they know what to do. They will control themselves, use their own tools. And, you might pay them by the hour or by the, unstopped drain. And that's the project. But again, can't control them. And this is an important part because you can't make your CEO contractor, because you have to control your CEO, right? Of course. The other two aspects are, okay, so first, can't control them. Second is you can't use a contractor to provide regular or continuous services of the business. So for example, in that plumbing situation there, yeah, you're a bakery, you don't do plumbing. Yeah, this person coming in to fix your plumbing, they're not providing the regular core services of the business. But if you were hiring a baker, yes, probably they are not going to meet this requirement. They are providing the continuous services of the bakery. They're probably going to need to be employees. And then finally, the independent contractor needs to have their own business and be able to work for others, like that plumber. Okay, they don't want people to just be a worker that only works for one entity, because the concern is they would be potentially exploited in that situation. So there are big penalties for misclassification. That means that somebody who feels they were misclassified, they should have been an employee, they should have been getting overtime, they should have had minimum wage, they can sue you in court, get their own attorney, probably get attorney's fees, and they can go back 4 years under the statute of limitations to file this. So the main thing we say with this is, okay, if you can meet that three-part test, or you qualify for one of the few exceptions to the law, which I can tell you about, you do need to arrange an independent contractor relationship in a written contract, and you probably want to address some things about liability, like for example, a contract with a plumber. If they screw up your drain, well, it's on them. Yeah, right. Or here you go, if somebody's a website designer for you, well, they produce all this code for you. Well, it should become your website, right? They shouldn't be able to continue to own it. So in the contract, it should have an assignment clause that says, now that's my intellectual property, my website. All right, you might finally say, well, what about volunteers or interns, unpaid people? Well, generally okay for nonprofits. For for-profits, that's highly regulated. These people are called interns. They're supposed to have an educational program. They should have no expectation of payment. They're not supposed to replace workers. Generally, interns are more trouble than they're worth, but you could set them up with some kind of educational program and maybe have them work for you for a little while. Okay, well, that's what we got for workers, and we can tell you about suppliers and landlords and other things, those operational relationships in our office hours if you have some questions about those. So now I'm going to turn over to Adriana to tell us about managing risks.
All right, so for managing risks, all new businesses are risky. And just like this picture where you have this boat on top of this car, that looks pretty risky right there. So we want to help you manage these risks that come with running a business. Next slide, please. So there are reasonable steps that you can take to manage these risks. As we've mentioned earlier, you can form a limited liability entity. So as Kavya mentioned, that could be a limited liability company or a corporation. And just to review really quickly, limited liability means that you're not personally liable for the business. So if someone sues you, they can't come after your personal assets like your house or your car. Another thing that you can do to manage your risk is to purchase insurance. That is another form to protect yourself more than the limited liability. That's another way to protect yourself. And when you purchase insurance, it's also a good idea to use a broker because they can help you find the best policies for you with different insurance agencies versus, getting all your insurance from one provider, which may not get you the best deal. Another thing that you should do is control your agents. And so what we mean by agents are your employees, your volunteers. So whatever they do, it's a reflection not only for your business, but it's also could legally impact you. So that's why you want to make sure to screen your workers when you're hiring them. You want to make sure who are you hiring, and you want to make sure to offer training and to supervise them. And on a similar note, you have to indemnify your agents. What this means is you are legally required. So in California, you're legally required to indemnify your agents. So when your workers are acting within their duties, so in the line of business, this is what you told them to do, then whatever they do, if it harms someone, then you as the business are going to cover their losses, any losses that is within the scope of their duties. So this is required by California. And a lot of times that's why we say you should get insurance, because if anything happens, then hopefully your insurance can cover that. And then also you should use contracts to share and limit your liability with others. An example of this is to have like non-disclosure agreements between you and your workers so that any private information, it doesn't get out into the public. And I'll discuss another type of contract later. Professor Kell mentioned it, dealing with assigning your intellectual property to the company. And then also just try to avoid any risky activities if possible. So with that photo we had of the car at the boat, maybe if you're selling boats, you don't want to transport them with like a small car. Maybe there's other forms of transportation you can use. And so all of the above efforts are helping you meet your fiduciary duties. So fiduciary duties are what the state of California expects from leaders of organizations. So as a leader, that would be you, you're going to have to follow the duty of care. And this means that you have to act as a reasonable manager of your organization. So for instance, before you take on any risky activity, you have to do thorough research to make sure it's reasonable for your business before you start doing that. So that would be an example of making sure that you're following that duty. Another duty is the duty of loyalty. This means that you have to put the interest of the company as a whole over your own individual self-interest. So an example of that would be, well, an example of not following your duty would be if you have an office space and you tell your business partners to rent from you, even though you know there are better prices elsewhere. This would be, you're putting your self-interest of trying to make more money over the interest of the company, which is to get a better deal. So that would be an example of not following it. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to talk about intellectual property. So intellectual property, what is that? So, and why does that matter? So intellectual property is intangible property. You can't touch it. So it's not the same as like this pencil, because this pencil, I can touch it. It's physical. So intellectual property is a lot of times your ideas, what you create. And it's important because it's usually in these companies, it could be the backbone of your company. So say you're a restaurant and you have a secret recipe. This recipe is the reason everyone comes to your restaurant. Like that's a form of your intellectual property. You want to keep that private, secret, so that no one else can use it. And so when you start a company, you're going to have many people that are a part of it. You have these founders. You yourself are a founder. You can have consultants, you can have engineers. And so all of these people will likely be learning about your business and also maybe even creating things that help your business. For instance, with an engineer, say they're helping code for your company, they're like typing code. You don't want the engineer to own that code, because in the United States, the individual, the human being, owns what they create. But you as a company, to protect yourself, want to make sure what the coder, what the engineer creates is owned by the company. And so the way you do that is you have them sign like an invention assignment agreement, which then makes whatever they create owned by the company. So that's just one way to protect your company, because people leave all the time. There could be friction, people get a job offer somewhere else, and the engineer could leave, and you don't want them to take the whole backbone of your company with them. So next slide, please. And there are also different ways to protect your intellectual property. There's this big list right here. There's trade secrets, patents, copyrights, trademarks, IP by contract. There are a lot of different ones. So just to quickly go through them. So for trade secrets, that's anything economically important to keep confidential for the company. So say it's that secret recipe. You have to take reasonable steps to protect your trade secret. So an example would be you maybe have a password protection on your laptop, and that's where you have this secret recipe. And then a really famous example of protecting your trade secret is from Coca-Cola. They have a humongous vault in Georgia where they hold their secret formula. And also out of all of their workers, all of the employees, not one employee knows all the ingredients of that recipe for Coca-Cola. They make sure that not one person can have all that information. And so another next is patents. So a patent is an invention or a process with unique design or utility. So an example of that would be the light bulb or a telephone or Bluetooth. All of those are inventions. And so for a patent, when you have that, it protects your invention for 20 years. That means no one else is able to use what you invent for 20 years, which is a lot. And so that's different than copyright, which is next. Copyright is used to protect the content of creative works, like a book or music. So you write a novel, you write poetry, you write a song. So you don't want other people to be able to use what you create. And so for copyright, that attaches automatically when it's in a tangible form. Tangible means like you can touch it. So an example of that is you write a poem on a piece of paper, and right there when you finish it, there you have a copyright, even though you didn't do anything, you didn't file anything with the government. But if you want to make sure someone doesn't steal your poem, you're going to have to file it with the government and try to get, copyright in order to actually protect it and make sure no one can use it. And so copyright is a little bit different than a patent, because for copyright, if the person, across the street from me comes up with that same poem independently by themselves, like they didn't look at mine, they also can have ownership of that. I can't stop them. Versus a patent, if that person across the street invents like the light bulb, and I had invented the light bulb too, like the other person cannot use my invention for 20 years. So patent is a lot more protecting than the copyright. And then the next is trademarks. So trademark is any word, any name, symbol, anything like that, that tries to connect the product with the source. So an example of a trademark would be, the Apple for Apple computer. It's that Apple with the bit in out part. That would be an example of a symbol, like you see that and it's an Apple product. And so with trademarks, the main goal is to protect consumers from confusion. We don't want people to go into a store trying to get, Advil, and then someone selling them something that's not Advil, right? So we're trying to protect consumers. So you as a business owner would want to trademark the name of your company. You're able to do that. And then there's IP by contract, which we discussed a little bit earlier, where you're creating these agreements to kind of create or restrict intellectual property rights. So just when you have that engineer writing code for you, you want to make sure that you write a contract to assign that IP to your company, and you want to have non-disclosure agreements so people don't take that information with them. So there's a lot of different types, and by implementing these tools that we've mentioned, like your business is on the way to managing its risks. And now I'll pass it back to Professor Kell.
All right, thank you. Well, we're in the home stretch now, guys. We just have a couple more thoughts here to cover. Extra permits and licenses that might be required to do your business. Think of these as the signs on the road, or getting a driver's license or something on the road to business success. All right, so here are the questions for you. You think about, okay, well, Is government going to care about what activities I do? Well, actually, usually they do. At the very least, they want you file in your local county this thing called a doing business as form, or sometimes it's called a fictitious business name form. And so they just want to know that you're operating in their jurisdiction and how to get in touch with you. They may also charge you, want you to purchase a business license, which is more like a revenue raising thing for, I know Fresno has one, I know Berkeley has one, sort of an annual fee that you have to keep paying over time if you're doing business there. Okay, now so that's sort of the basic one. Everybody has to register with their local county. Now, what about where I do my activities? Are they going to care about this? Well, yeah, they may care about that too, because there may be some, dangerous things you're doing, or, they usually have a big map of the county or the city where, residential activities can go on, usually separate from commercial activities or industrial activities or something. So you have to check with your local county zoning board to see if they have any restrictions there. And they even have you file for a home-based business as well, sometimes. So doing regulated activities, though, like food selling or things like that, where you are required to get a permit. If you don't get that permit, this is a big lawsuit risk, because a court is just going to say, wait a minute, you're selling food and you don't have a permit? Ooh, you are liable right now for this person's liver that they lost. It's called per se negligence to not get the permit that you were supposed to get. All right, now where were you going to get these permits? Well, fortunately, they have a nice website for you here in California. It's called calgold.ca.gov. And if you plug in your business activity there, then it'll spit out what permits you need to get. And then again, make sure you get those permits before you get into business, because it is a big lawsuit risk if you fail to get them. All right, well, that's pretty much all we have, folks. I know it went over time just a little bit, but this is your checklist to keep track of the legal issues that most businesses need to solve to get out on the road. Business modeling, entity formation, capital, operational relationships, set those up correctly, manage those risks, and get those permits and licenses. And that'll help you become a survivor, one of these businesses that'll exist after the first 5 years. And we want you to get out on the road and get safe. So here's how you get in touch with us. First, you can sign up for services, our office hours at www.law.site. Also, you could email us at newbusinesslaw@law.berkeley.edu, or call that number as well. But the main thing is, it's hard to do a business. Legal aspects are so hard to find out about if you can't afford an attorney. We're going to be there for you to help you. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Anusha and Kavya and Adriana, you did so well. Let's stop the share at this point and turn to the chat, if we can. And by the way, students, do jump in if you want to try and address any of these questions here. So let's go. Go back to the start here. Hold on. We got it there. Become resource download, right? Going. Okay, come on up. And we'll keep going. We're trouble moving this up here. Here we go. Send us your questions. Here we go. In California, licensed marriage and family therapists are not allowed to be an LLC. That's probably right. Anytime you have a license that requires, that is required to do your business activity, generally speaking, you can't do that in an LLC. Okay. The question is, can you do that in a corporation? Okay. Well, a sole proprietor could do a therapist situation as well. A corporation is possible. You have sort of two choices on the corporation front. One is a regular corporation, just like what we described earlier. But then there's also this thing called a professional corporation. And the distinctive point is that the professional corporation, everyone in the leadership has the license that is being practiced in the business. Okay, so like a law firm could be a corporation, and as long as all of the leadership, all of the shareholders, all of the board members are lawyers, licensed lawyers, then you can do it that way. But you could possibly set it up just as a corporation where, all you have to do is have one person in the leadership who has the license to be able to practice there. And then other people, you could have friends or family or whatever you want on the board there. Now, one thing I would suggest, and we've seen this lately, is you should probably go to your licensing agency in the state of California and ask them if you need to be in a professional corporation, because like the bar, yeah, for a lawyer, they'll say, yeah, you have to be in a professional corporation. And some don't even care. So like we checked recently for an engineer and the engineering board said, no, you could going forward. Okay. Next would be, do I leave away from the proprietorship and go to S Corp when expanding, or can I keep both? I'm sure it depends. Yeah, we could follow up with you on that. You know, definitely sign up for an office hour there, but I would tend to run one or the other. An S Corp, by the way, as I think it was Kavya was talking about, S Corps, remember, is just it's sort of a tax status. It's actually registering a corporation, because at the default, it's an entity level taxpayer, which is called a C Corp. Instead, if you wanted an S Corp where you had a pass through, you would have to set up your corporation, then file for the certain tax status. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. So proprietor, what if you have your personal assets in a living trust? Does that offer protection of personal assets? My understanding is generally no. If you have given the trust, if you have given control of the trust over to somebody else and you actually cannot access it in any way, shape, or form, then maybe. But that's something we'd have to look up a little bit more for you, because generally creditors can go after anything that you have anything you have control over. Finally, do we have any others? Looks like no other questions. Okay, well, if people wanted to unmute and ask some questions at this point, that's okay too, but I know we're running over time a little bit. Any questions? Go ahead and unmute. Okay, well, it sounds like, Sandra, we're at the end there. Oh, there is one new message. Wait a minute, what is this new message? Oh, thank you. That's very informative. Oh, thank you. Well, and again, we're going to be back here next month. I can't, next month, what we were doing commercial leasing next month. I can't remember. Sandra, do you remember?
Yes, let me go ahead and check really quickly. I think all of the questions have been answered. So thank you so much, Bill. And a lot of great comments here about using the become the survivor analogy, the driving analogy. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm going to be pulling up our schedule for next month. So give me 1 second here. So our next meeting will be taking place on February 18 at 1 p.m. And the topic that has been scheduled in advance is going to be exactly the one that you just shared. Regarding, we're gonna expand further into entity selection, focusing on how to form a LLC.
Oh, that's right. We're going to do LLCs next time. Yeah. Well, we'll be doing commercial leasing soon too. So,
Yeah.
All righty. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Adriana, Anusha, Kavya. You did such a great job.
Yes, thank you, Diana, Kavya, Anusha, and also Linguistica team for today's interpretation.
Okay.